Bets. Oh, thank you. My fan. So I'm Bets, and I'm the youth pastor here, and I just want to welcome you. If someone hasn't welcomed you already, this is your welcome. Um, so, and today is our classic gathering, and the children's classes are open. My children are back there, so thank you to those of you that are, well, you're not in here if you're helping. You're back there, so thank you to them. Make sure you thank them. But here are some ways that you can get connected. The first would be our movement class that is at 5:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays, and it's run by our handsome John Gonzalez up there. He runs this all-ages fitness group that meets twice a week, and they do a devotional, they do short duration, high-intensity interval training. Woo! So, yeah, 5:30. And PM, thank goodness. Can you imagine? So, and that is just across the hall in our youth room. And the next thing that you can join in on is called Ecstatic Dance, and it's also going to meet across the hall. That meets on Thursday mornings, a.m. at 10:45. So it is sweat your prayers on a guided movement journey, and it's for the next 2 Thursdays, right? And the next one is the Atlantic Theater Supper Club, and that is just a one-time thing on June 30th at 6 p.m. It's a fundraiser for this beautiful space. It's going to be, it says the first of many, so that's exciting. But it's a consciously sourced and soulfully combined farm-to-table dinner prepared by our very own Blakely Stein. So that's going to be delicious and fun, and for a very good cause. It's going to help keep us doing what we do here in this building. So yeah, those are some ways to get connected. Sorry. So, and the next thing that you can do is sign up for our newsletter. There are these little pamphlets all throughout the building, and there's one right here if you want it. Raise your hand if you want it. If you want to sign up for our newsletter. No one wants it. She wants it. Here you go. There's a QR code on there and everything. Yay, Bobby. Okay, so, and the next few things I just wanted to say were that you can please check out our family room across the hall if you have a baby or a little one who wants to get their wiggles out. There's like a cute little kitchen in there and toys, and we live stream Bobby's sermon in there. It's really great. And then also, we have a beautiful space we like to call the Peace and Prayer Room. And if this building is open, it is available to you. It's a beautiful space. You could also call the church and see if someone's here if you want us to let you in. Like, even if the building's not open, we will let you in. Another thing you can do is sign up for spiritual directions with one of our directors. It's another thing we offer here by appointment only. And last but not least, please give and thank you for giving. Yeah, and that's it. Oh, and I want to introduce, come on up here. This is Carolyn. She's in charge of all of our little ones. And she has something very, very important to say, and I want you all to listen.
Oh, listen up. Okay, I have 2 things to say. One is that in 2 weeks from today, we do like our graduation day with the kids. So the kids that are, they all move up to a new grade in the fall. But because we group some of the ages, they won't all move up to a new classroom. So it's kids going into kindergarten, 3rd grade, and middle school. They'll get a new classroom in 2 weeks. If they want to come check out what their new room will look like, just come find me after service, or next week we can do that. Thank you. And then the other thing is we really need volunteers. Preferably if I could get 4, that would be great. We had a few people step down, and we're doing okay, but if we could get some more, that would be wonderful. We have kids from babies up to 5th grade, and they're split into 4 different rooms, so if you're better with the little kids, you can do that. If you'd rather hang out with like elementary age kids, you can do that. Everything is prepared. I get lessons, craft snacks, all that ready, so all you have to do is show up, and it's a once-a-month commitment. If you're interested, come find me in the kids section down the hall on the right. You have to be background checked, pass a background check, and be good with kids. That's pretty much it. Okay, thank you. That's it. What? Oh.
Sorry, one more thing. On this Tuesday, we have youth group at 6 o'clock, and we're doing a nacho bar and a movie night. So if you have a middle schooler or a high schooler, even if they don't come to this church, they are welcome to come, enjoy a movie. Where are my kids? I saw Lucy and Lily. Okay, well, we do have children. They're all back there. So send your kids our way. Okay.
All right, thank you. Look at the smattering of applause. Nicely done. All right, let's take just a second before we move into the teaching part of the morning, and just take a second to collect ourselves and maybe pay attention to your breath, settle into the seat where you happen to be sitting, listen to your body, pay attention to whatever thoughts or feelings you may be experiencing, you might have brought in with you. Just take a second just to pay attention. And we'll do that for just a few seconds, and we'll get started. Amen. All right. Well, good morning. How was everybody? You guys good? All right. I'm Bobby, and I do this kind of thing around this place. And if you're new here, then I want you to know that I try to keep these interactive. So I may periodically ask questions. They are generally not rhetorical. So if you have a thought or a response, feel free to share it. And slightly unusual, I guess, for this format. So just so everybody knows, you're allowed to talk to. So we've been in the series about the parables of Jesus, parabola, and we're going to stick with that. This is our 10th parable we'll be taking a look at here this morning. And this one is called the parable of the barren fig tree. So if you want to flip the page to your first slide, a second. You got a little painting and some text there? We in the right place? Okay. This is kind of fun. I kind of like this low-text situation, honestly. Corey and I had to run a bunch of staples in. I got one in my thumb, but otherwise it's a labor of love. All right, so this is Jesus. Luke 13, 6 through 9, he says, this is a story he told. He says, a man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but he didn't find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, listen, for 3 years now, I've been coming down to look for fruit on this fig tree, and I haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? And sir, the man said, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, cut it down. The kingdom of heaven is like this, he says. Which takes us to our next part 1, which is what the fig, like what? The fig. All right. I had a hunch about this, and I had just a blast doing this research here. I had a hunch that the fig tree played an important or central role in all of the world's religions and cultures at the time of Jesus, and most of the world's religions and cultures in our time too. And so I, did a little research and found out that it was by sitting under a sacred fig tree, the Bodhi tree, that the Buddha was said to have reached enlightenment. So in Buddhism, the fig tree represents wisdom and enlightenment. Fig tree is a sacred symbol. Buddhism. Have you ever seen a banyan tree? You know those ones that they're all over the place down in South Florida. We had one in our yard when I was a kid. I grew up in Bradenton, and they're great to climb because they've got these. They never stop reaching. They have to hit something to stop growing outward because the way that they work is their branches put down roots, and that stabilize the branches, turn the branches into trunks, and on they go. There's some down in Sarasota at the Ringling Museum that are like a city block. They're amazing trees. And I was so captivated by them not that long ago. I was doing a bunch of research, and I learned that they are, the banyan is a sacred symbol in Hinduism in India, and it's because, this is a sort of less than lovely title, but the banyan is also a fig tree. It's called a strangler fig. And the way the strangler fig works is the seeds are spread through the digestive tracts of birds, all right? So a little seed lands on another full-grown tree, and the seed cracks open, takes root, and then as the plant establishes, it sends roots down the host tree into the ground and eventually strangles the tree, sadly. But the interesting thing about well, you know, everybody, when it's time, it's time. Nobody lives forever. The interesting thing, or what's interesting to the Hindus in India is because the way the roots work, they start in the sky and reach to the earth. And so they consider the banyan this meeting place between heaven and earth. They call it the cosmic tree. It grows upside down rather than reaching towards the heavens. The heavens reach towards the earth. And so the banyan tree is called the tree of, they actually call it the tree of life. And it's a symbol of life and fertility and rebirth. Now, in the Hebrew scriptures, the ones that Jesus would have been most familiar with, most likely, there are 44 verses that mention the fig tree. It's pretty significant. That's right, 44. And here's a little factoid for you. You know the pictures of like medieval art of Eve and Adam with the apple, and they've taken the bite out of the apple, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know where or how or why the apple made its way. And it was probably like an ad campaign or something by somebody's orchard back in medieval times. Although I guess that's not good press. Yeah, so it's probably somebody's banana farm trying to get the apple guy out of business. Big pomegranate. Yeah. Yeah, it was most likely a fig tree, not an apple tree, right? Because figs were much more common in the Middle East. And also, in Genesis, it says that after they took and ate, their eyes were opened and they could see that they were naked. They experienced shame for the first time. And they covered themselves with the leaves of a fig tree. Most likely, probably, the closest thing they could grab. So it's a pretty good chance that the fruit that's being referenced there is a fig. But over time, in the Hebrew tradition, the fig tree became a symbol of healing and peace and prosperity and wisdom because the fig tree came to symbolize the riches of the promised land when the first spies went out, when the Israelites were on the edge of the promised land after all these years and years and years of desert wandering. The spies reported back that the land was flowing with milk and honey, full of fig trees, grapevines, and giants. Hey, how about this? How about this, guys? I just learned this on a field trip to St. Augustine. Finally went on one of those trolleys and had some pirates explain to me about the regional history. Some pirates. I think they're just like Ohio retirees moonlighting as pirates. But the particular pirate that we got was a very gifted tour guide. And he told me, and then later, somebody else confirmed. You know the Timucua, the Indians, the Native Americans that lived around here way back when? All right, so this has nothing to do with the sermon. I'm sorry, it's just interesting to me. The ships came dancing across the water, Cortez, and all these Spaniards, these conquistadors, came off, and they were all very small people. I don't know if the average height for a Spanish conquistador back in 1500 is 4'10". And they said that they measured from the boot to the top of the feather. So the higher up ranking you were in the army, the taller feather, so you could kind of fudge your numbers. So they probably weren't even 4'10", okay, little guys. Fierce little guys. And the Timucua, how about this? Do you know this? The average height of a Timucua warrior was 7'2". So can you imagine? The perspective of is fascinating to me, to consider being a native, right? You just get up one morning out of your tent and stretch and look out across the water, and you're like, what is this? Because their ships were like, hollowed out. They would burn the top of a palm tree and then scoop it out, and you'd have a little canoe, and that was sort of like max technology for the most part. And these ships come across the water, and they've got guns and funny hats. But then imagine being these Spanish folks. Like, not only is there like malaria and palmetto bushes and water moccasins and everything else that makes Florida, like, I don't want to go outside right now, do you? But then the people are 7.5 feet tall. It's crazy. Like, actually, I haven't looked this up to confirm if this is true or not. But he seemed like a reliable pirate, so you might want to Google it before you share it with a crowd. I don't know. Anyway, I said that because I thought about Caleb and Joshua, the spies, and how they came back and reported that the land's full of giants. And I thought, what is this, a pattern? So there were fig trees in the promised land. And so the fig tree became a symbol of prosperity, wisdom, peace, and healing. But then the promised land wasn't everything it was cracked up to be. Even in the promised land, there's drama. And they kind of lost their ground there. And so then the fig tree moved further out into the imagination. And this is the downside of promises. Isn't it? Or hope is an interesting function of being a person, because I'm pretty sure we couldn't exist without it. But hope and promises, they're always, they put off into the future what we might be able to experience in the moment if we could bring ourselves back here and open our eyes to our life as it is, and find that, like sing this morning, the grace and goodness, it reaches through it all. It's always here. So the symbol of the fig tree in the Hebrew tradition got reworked post-Promised Land and became an emblem or an idea or a representation of the coming age of the Messiah, when the Messiah would come and make all things right. And the prophets offered this blessing. This is in multiple the prophetic texts in the Old Testament. This is Micah's rendition. He says, everyone's going to sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. So if you turn the page into the Christian tradition, into the New Testament, we find the fig tree is prominently mentioned also. And here's a funny little thing, right? Jesus talks about the fig tree on a number of occasions, including the parable we just read. He appears to maintain a very low opinion of the fig tree. He's, all right. So here's the first fig incident in the New Testament. And what happens here right before this text is Nathaniel, this guy who goes on to be a disciple of Jesus, he has a brother named Philip who meets Jesus. Jesus kind of reads his mail, as they say, and blows Philip's mind. And so he's like, I got to get my brother. He's got to come meet you too. So he goes and gets Nathaniel, and he tells him, you got to meet this guy from Galilee. I just met this man from Galilee. I think he's the Messiah. He just told me everything about me. That's what he says. And his brother Nathaniel says, Galilee? Can anything good come from Galilee? It's kind of a little backwater town on the other side of the tracks, He's like, not impressed. What else you got? And that's when Philip says, you just have to come and see. And so they go together, and here's our text. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, well, here's a real Israelite in whom there is no duplicity. Nathanael apparently thinks that's an accurate read on him. He says, how do you know me? And Jesus says, well, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. And who knows what was going on under that fig tree, because it prompts Nathanael to say, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. You're the Messiah. And here's what Jesus says. You believe because I told you that I saw you under a fig tree? Or you're going to see greater things than that. Truly, I tell you, you'll see heaven open. You'll see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And Jesus is like, you think fig trees are cool? Like, wait until you see what your eyes will open to. And that's about the kindest way that he ever treated a fig. In Mark and Matthew's gospel, there's this, like, people don't know what to do with this story, all right? I've been Christianing really hard for a long time. I've spent a lot of time in the Bible. I've read a million commentaries, and 4 commentaries probably, but they're so long. And there's this weird little story, and everybody has these odd little interpretations, and they're usually really mean. They're kind of like mean-spirited. But I don't think Jesus curses anything else in the whole course of his ministry. I don't, just, right? Maybe. But he curses this fig tree. He goes into Jerusalem. Jerusalem doesn't like him. They reject him. On his way out, he passes a fig tree, and he's like, there's no fruit on it, but it's not fig season, all right? So it's not even the tree's fault. And he's like, where's the fruit? There's no fruit. And then he curses it and says, never will you bear fruit again. And this happens in Mark and Matthew. And in Matthew's gospel, the tree like withers up, like shrivels up and dies like instantaneously. Jesus curses something. He like does this woe to you thing, which seems more kind of like a gentle, like, hey, maybe reconsider what you're doing. But a curse? It's hardcore. And then in Luke's gospel, like we just read here this morning, the fig tree is not cast in a very favorable light. It's kind of the villain of the piece here. So here's my question, all right? Somehow in all 3 of the first century world's major religions, because this Jesus' time would have predated Islam and, of course, Christianity. So in all 3 of the first century world's major religions, the fig tree was a sacred and a central symbol that meant life, wisdom, enlightenment, the promised land, like salvation, the thing that we're here for. And Jesus uniformly curses the fig trees in the New Testament. And I'm just, I like to make little puzzles for myself. And so this was the puzzle of the last couple of weeks. I'm like, what's the beef with the fig tree? In Matthew's gospel, he says that the trees have big, impressive branches. They have lots of shiny leaves, and they're not doing anything useful. There's no actual fruit. What's going on here? Interpret, if you want to. Yeah. It's not enough to be beautiful.
Kingdom of God now. Not here with us now.
Yeah. The kingdom of God is for now, not only for later, right? Not for later, but not only for later.
Even when you got this promise right in front of you, it's not always what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes the experience of the promise, it's like that Tom Petty song where he's like, the waiting is the sweetest part. Sometimes the anticipation of the thing is better than the experience of the thing.
I think it's a little bit of deconstruction. He was always putting it to the Pharisees and the religious system at the time. And if the fig tree is, as you say, symbolic of the 3 major religions, he was saying that's over. And I'm here now, and the fig tree doesn't matter.
And what was the message that Jesus carried? What does it mean that he's here now?
The tree was the symbol. He's the real deal.
The kingdom of God is here.
The kingdom of God is here. Yeah, the first words that we have recorded in the scriptures, he says, The time has come. Just now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, which means here. So repent, which means change the way that you think. And believe the good news rather than just partying with the bad news. It's for later. Later starts to take care of itself the more I ground myself in the here and now. And all the theoretical questions and the what ifs and the what'll happen when. And when I'm able to notice that I'm in that headspace, that I've heard it called like future tripping, you know, you're just running all these programs about hopes, dreams, fears, anxieties, pasts, you know. The more I find myself aware of what I'm thinking, able to observe my thoughts and patterns, and the more I can rest in the presence of God within me in the here and now, the more my eyes, my perspective, my paradigm, that kind of like tight, the fear and the what if, it starts to loosen so that we experience the grace and the goodness and the gift of right now, however it is. And resting in this place, all the concerns about what may come, they just sort of, they drift off, you know, because what can any of us really know anyway?
Maybe the fig tree, maybe his critique for the fig tree, about the fig tree, is kind of like making it a symbol of the current religion. Because in the parable, he says that the tree is just taking up valuable soil, and it's not giving fruit. So maybe it's like the Pharisees and everybody in the time right now is trying to waste and promising all, that there will be fruit, that this will be helpful, and it's just kind of a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody made him eat too many figs as a kid and he just doesn't like them.
Oh, it's just totally personal. It's just a matter of,
Really deep, and he's like, no, have you ever had a fig?
yeah, it's just a matter of taste, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, Fig Newtons, man, I remember being a kid and somebody would be like, would you like some cookies? And there'd be a Fig Newton. You'd be like, shoot, you said cookie. It's not a cookie? Yeah, it might be that. I don't know. All right. No, just don't like how they taste. Thank you. There are many different ways to understand and work with what it is that Jesus meant when he said the kingdom of heaven. And it's something, he refused to be like linear about it. He would always say it's like this, it's like that. Analogy, metaphor, poetry, the closest that we can get to the experience of the ineffable. Somewhere along the way, somebody said, you know, God can't be explained. God can only be experienced. And the experience of God is always familiar. Part of you is like, oh, this is it. This is what those words mean. And the true experience of God is also impossible to communicate. It's like trying to explain a dream. The more words you pile up, the less clear it gets. When I read the words, the teaching, and the life of Jesus, and I open myself up to an interpretation of what he meant by the kingdom, what makes the most sense, what creates a through line through his life, my understanding of him, is this to understand the kingdom as a paradigm, as a way of seeing. He said on the regular, interestingly, Jesus, he never said, worship me, not even one time. What he routinely said was, follow me, be like me, learn to live this way. And we don't learn, here's a good way to burn out, to try to live like Jesus before we see like Jesus. Because we can get a lot done that way, and nothing happens.
Will you say that one more time?
Yeah, we have enough information and a couple thousand years of systems organizing around Jesus' life and teaching that we can learn to live like him. But this is a sure path to disillusionment, fatigue, burnout, which maybe that's what you need. Unless we see in the same way that he does, which was what he offers and extends still. That's what got him in so much trouble, like you say about the Pharisees. I mean, they killed this guy. Not for attempted fig murder. The problem with Christ was the democratization of awakening. That we all have access to the same reality because it's innate within each of us, because the same Spirit who brought Christ into the world brought us into the world. The same Spirit who lives in him lives in us. All of us. The Pharisees were always hassling him, they're like the bad guys in the New Testament. And it was to them that he said, you're looking everywhere for the kingdom, but the kingdom's within you. And now our translators have a really hard time with that. They try to make the word say among you, because they're like, well, he couldn't have meant inside those guys. He might have meant maybe next to those guys in the general area. But the word is within. It's in. It's here. And when we begin to rest in this place of seeing, this like walking prayer, this walking meditation, and pay attention to not just the things that are happening around us, but what's happening within us. The busyness of the mind, the fears, the concerns, the darkness, the roller coaster, the ups, the downs. And when we begin to observe these experiences from a deeper place where we can see ourselves, what we access in this place is rest and patience and a peace that passes understanding, which means it transcends our circumstances, which means we don't have to fix anything. We don't have to change anything. We don't even have to change ourselves. Jesus said, adopt this paradigm, work with me, learn to be like me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. You look burnt out, you're trying to do it by yourself. And it doesn't need to be that way. And when we begin to see from this place, it's simultaneously painful and also the most liberating experience there is. It's painful because we get to know ourselves. All these weird little agreements we've made with ourselves and all the places we've been duped willingly or willfully or unwillfully. All the patterns and the unforgiveness. The places where we allowed important aspects of who we are just to be totally shut down because of something somebody said sometime, some thought we had. We begin to see ourselves. And that is like a painful process, man. That's why Jesus said, you have to die to yourself because it feels like a death, this kind of seeing. And simultaneously, it's the most liberating experience there is because for the first time, maybe, we actually access the ability to choose how we want to live in this world. rather than having these patterns formed in us from childhood just do the work for us, you know? I hope this is an okay story. Jess and Jason's grandma, Nia, Grammy, fiery Italian woman. Man, Grammy was the first, Jess and I have known each other forever. And Grammy was the first person that was like over 80 that I realized I could actually be myself around when I was a teenager. I'm like, what? This is an option? Like, she's like cussing and smoking and acting wild and wanting all the stories and know what's going, you know, she's, oh man, I loved her. And towards the end of her life, she was in this facility thing there, medical complex situation, and Jason and I would go back to visit her, and we'd have to get her in a wheelchair, and all these corridors and no windows and fluorescent lights, you know, I mean, it was like a maze. There were 26 turns to get to her, and you did not want to get lost in there. But, some of our systems are strange. One time, we got her, and she would always be like, you know, break me out of here. And so we'd take her, and like, she's like, run. So we're in a wheelchair, and we're going, and there's this other lady in a wheelchair, and she's just sitting out in front of her door there, and she's kind of slumped over and doesn't look like she's alert. And so, you know, I'm like, morning, and I go around her, and she shuffles her wheelchair in front and blocks me so I can't go. And I was like, oh, all right. And so I kind of back up, and then I go around behind her, and she backs up and blocks me again. And then we did this like 5 or 6 times, and this nurse came by, and she goes, oh, honey, she'll do that all night. She's a blocker. She's a blocker. But she never looked at us. There was no, you know, I tried to make contact. I was like, hi. And her eyes were, it was like what she wasn't. And I thought, whoa, man, that's like a pattern. You know? Like this stuff starts to break down eventually, this whole thing going on up here. The choice, the chooser, or what we think is the chooser. And we're left with I took that as a lesson. I'm like, what are my patterns? Because I don't want to be a blocker when I'm 95. Like, I'd like to be a, you know, I don't know, door opener or something. Or laugher. That could get kind of creepy, actually. Okay. Patterns. Patterns. They feel like original thoughts. They feel like original actions. The people that know us best could have seen it coming a mile away. And liberation comes from our consciousness, our awareness of these patterns. And the funny thing, I've heard like nothing can withstand the loving gaze of God. Only love. So when we come to recognize the patterns, the shame part of us wants to be like, bad pattern, bad person, fix that, change that. And the method of grace is to look with God at ourselves honestly, without judgment. Because God sees the same things that we do, except God doesn't judge. We do that. So to just rest from that and to come to know ourselves, not to radically overhaul our lives so we can have just another ego project, but to rest with God and observe and come to know who we really are. This is Thomas Keating. It's a slide you have there in your hand. He says, trust in God disregards the evidence in everyday life. Trust in God disregards the compounding evidence that God is absent or forgetful of us, and it brings us into direct contact with the God of the everyday. The God of pure faith is so close. Closer than breathing, closer than thinking, closer than choosing, closer than consciousness itself. And so how is this reality accessed? How do we come into contact with this part of us who's resting in the presence of God, who's resting in us? Let go. Let go of what? Of course they do. Thank you. Yeah, figs are sacred in Islam too. It's the way that a fast is broken. The fig. They soak it and then drink the water and then eat it, he says. So yeah, we let go into this reality. You know, the way that Jesus explained it, and he said this often. And what he said, this is on your handout there too, is he says, whoever clings to their life exactly how it is destroys that very life. The tighter you hold, the greater the chance of losing it. But if you let it go, then you'll have it forever. And the real and the eternal. So in Luke's gospel, there is mercy that's shown to the barren tree, and it's has somebody intercede for it and say, let's try to fertilize it at least before we chop it down. And we'll give it a year and then take a look. So I looked up that word fertilize in the Greek. I was curious about that. It's this word kopria. It's a dunghill manure. All right, that's what fertilizer is. The root word is kopto. And it means to be cut off, to be struck, to mourn with a cutting sense of personal tragic loss. I've been cut to the heart. The root word that he uses here is this one of tragedy. It's like the tree needs, it's not really alive. And what this gardener recommends is can we kickstart it? Can we pour our resources into it for just a minute and see if there's some way to wake it up? And my experience has been, as I would wager yours is too, the way that we come to access an alternate way of seeing is generally through great suffering or love. Each of those experiences, when they're true and deep and they won't stop and you can't control it, and you settle into the discomfort and you stop asking why about suffering or love, right? And you allow it to do its work. You know, it's just so destabilizing to the ego because there's no way to control it, you know? Have you ever tried to fall in love with somebody? Like, with great mental effort, you know what I mean? Or try to fall out of love with somebody? I'm sure it can be done. I'm far too emotional to even try. The expression is to fall in love. It's it's out of control. And when the ego's destabilized for long enough, we begin to have, even if it's just brief glimpses, a different way to be in this world. Now, the one thing that I want to close with this, the one thing that there's a sense of urgency, right? I'm not sure if that's the exact right word, but there's a sense of urgency, isn't there? Because it's let's throw all the resources here, and we'll give it a year. And I don't know how these things work. I have a hunch that the grace never really runs out, but you've been through seasons, where you're there is something that I'm meant to let go of, that I'm meant to see, that I'm meant to learn. I'm so confused. There's something here. And there's always the temptation to turn off our awareness, to turn off our receptivity, to resist, to reach out and fix and change when we can tell that we're meant to wait and see. And there is a little urgency here, because I do sense that if this word is tied to suffering, tragedy, and the question appears to be what do we do with our tragedies? How do we incorporate the unexpected and the suffering? because it can be a vehicle for transformation and renewal. It can reveal the places where we're stuck and what it is that we're clinging to, holding tightly to. And this is profoundly helpful in learning to let go and to trust, to see these things. Or depending on how we handle it, I guess it could, spell the end of us too. It's a cliffhanger at the end of this parable. I was working on this, and a friend of mine, Danny Mullins, he's my teacher for the School of Spiritual Direction and mentor to me these days. I was working on this just yesterday, actually, and he texted me this little rather lengthy quote, and I was like, wow, well, that's cool. So I'm going to read it, and this is in conclusion. And this guy, James Finley, says it better than I could. He says it better than most. He says, the great risk of all spirituality is that it so easily becomes a surrogate for being present to life. All too often, the search for religious experiences and the promotion of spiritualities have become exercises in the care and the feeding of sacred cows. Now, sacred cows are important. They're the symbolic mythic structures that give us our social identity. They must not be abused or neglected, for they will turn on us with a vengeance of inner and social barbarism and destruction. But there is the door of prayer. There is the gate of disinterested love, the gate of presence. It's a narrow gate. It stands at the very center of ourselves. And when we enter this land of silent music and sounding solitudes, the sacred cows must rest content to graze outside the gates. By entering this land, we learn to divest ourselves of the sacred cows' claim on us. We learn to tend to them instead of letting them tend to us. In this land, we discover that it is in a total surrender of our whole life to God that we attain to the freedom of the children of God. It is in this land we discover that we are nothing and we are everything. All this is so because God is all in all, and he has taken us to himself and lives in us and delights in us. We no more need a soapbox to stand on than does the moon or a single blade of grass wet with dew. So we'll just sit with these, sit with whatever you got. Katie, if you don't mind coming up and playing, we have just a couple minutes, and you don't have to rush out of here. You're welcome to stay for as long as you'd like. The communion elements are available and open to all. There's prepackaged ones on either side of the stage too. But just make yourself comfortable, be present to what you noticed most, and allow that to be the beginning place of prayer. If you'd like somebody to pray with you or for you, if you make your way over to this section over here by the little mirrored tree situation, somebody will be happy to come pray with you. So let's just take a few minutes.